And welcome to the Health Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Holly B. Today, I am introducing you to Dr. Karen Kramer. Dr. Karen has been healing hearts and inspiring minds as a grief recovery expert, a retreat center founder, a mindset facilitator, speaker, and author. In addition to her private practice and opening of the Villa Vision Wellness and Retreat Center, she has also been a faculty member, program manager, and executive coach at the Center for Creative Leadership, where she guides leaders from new managers to C-suite executives. She also served as co-facilitator and program director for Teen Wisdom, Inc., certifying teenage girl life coaches, which is beyond awesome. And additionally, Dr. Karen has served as the head coach for Recalibrate 360 with a pivotal role in certifying individuals in the life-altering realms of neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, timeline therapy, and hydrotherapy. With a wealth of international coaching experience, a profound understanding of techniques that unlock the subconscious mind, and her intuitive abilities, her new book, Healthy Grief, becomes her gift to help create a better world for everyone. As a native of San Diego, Dr. Karen cherishes her life in the embrace of sunny Southern California. And as a womanpreneur and a mother who successfully raised 5 children in a blended family, she intimately understands the art of juggling life's priorities while maintaining a semblance of sanity most of the time. What I love about Dr. Karen is that she has a great sense of humor about the life experience, the experience of being a human. And she does not claim to be perfect, but she has lived her life and created a career around understanding the human experience better, gathering a better understanding of tools of how we can move through that human experience a little bit lighter, a little bit freer, and with tools to keep us from letting it bog us down. So today we're here to talk about her new book called Healthy Grief. Grief is a topic that comes up in the chronic health community a lot. So it's one that I wanted to discuss because we go through this grief process when you end up with lupus or with some other chronic health issue, and you go through grief of the loss of the life that you thought you were going to be living, maybe the loss of physical abilities, the loss of the ability to make your own choices in certain aspects. And it can be really challenging to deal with, right? So grief, and we'll talk about this in the podcast, is not just about losing a loved one. There are all kinds of micro griefs that we experience throughout life, and losing our health can be one of them. Losing a job, losing a pet, all kinds of different things, losing a relationship, all these things result in grief. And if we don't learn how to move through that grief in a way that is healthy, it can end up stagnating in the body and creating more health and dis-ease, which, as many of you listening may know, if you have a chronic illness, a lot of times grief or trauma was a trigger for your symptoms. So we're going to tease all this out a little bit. Dr. Karen is a wealth of knowledge and has so many great resources and tips for us in this podcast episode. And also, we are going to be talking about not just the experience of the griever, but also as a supporter of somebody who's grieving too. So we've got lots of valuable tools for both being in the grieving process as well as being there as a supporter of somebody that is going through something that they're grieving. So this episode is jam-packed. I am going to zip it now so we can dive right in. Please listen to this one, download this one, and make sure that you check the links in the show notes afterwards, because I'll have the link to Dr. Karen's work and her book in the show notes for you to access. All right, enjoy this episode with Dr. Karen Kramer. thank you so much for coming on the Health Bridge podcast today. I can't wait to introduce you to our listeners.
Well, thank you for the invite.
It was great to connect with you recently, and I'm so happy to have you on because you specialize in talking about something that typically is not addressed, I think, very publicly. It's one of those behind closed doors topics, and it leaves us not knowing how to manage and maneuver and move through the topic of grief. So, your new book is called Healthy Grief. And I'd love for you to just give us an overview of what you're talking about when you're speaking to grief and why we should talk about it more.
I love it. And actually, to a point you just made, Holly, is we live in a grief avoidance community or culture as it is. And for those of us who actually live within the United States, it's written into our Declaration of Independence, which is the pursuit of happiness. So if we're not happy, then something's wrong and needs to be fixed, which actually gets into the subtitle of the book. So, Healthy Grief, Normalizing and Navigating Loss in a Culture of Toxic Positivity. So I'll start first with the definition of grief because you hit upon it. It really is more than just death and dying, it's an everyday loss. But for here, let's talk about what grief is. If you Googled grief, you will find that it is an event where you have a significant emotion, a deep emotion associated with that. I like adding it on where when what once was is no longer, kind of like a proverbial book where you have in this last chapter of your life, whether that person was alive, whether you had that relationship, and these are types of grief, you had that job, you had that certain health, you had the children at home and now are an empty nester. You had that job and now you're retired and a retiree. So what once was is no longer. And as we transition, it's not as easy as a book is to say, okay, close that chapter, I'm moving on to the next. We're in this process of moving on to what life now is, that we no longer have that. Again, that could be a person, a relationship. It could be our certain health. It could even be hopes and dreams that we have lost. It's that transition. It's when we're literally stuck in the past, or like I like to say, is the last chapter of our life and have trouble moving forward. That is grief, a significant loss.
I like the way that you frame that because I think, I don't know if justifies is the right word, but it helps people understand that it's okay to have these certain feelings of grief over things that society might not consider something you should be grieving. Like you said,
Mhm.
loss of certain hopes and dreams, loss of health, even loss of a pet. Society doesn't deem that as important, right? As loss of a human being, a loved one. So that really, I think, is a bit freeing to understand that definition of it because it says what you're feeling is okay.
And it's called disenfranchised grief. There is a name for it. So it's the type of grief that, which you just mentioned, Holly, it's not necessarily recognized by society or valued by society. However, we're still feeling that sense of loss and going through a similar process as if we just lost a loved one due to a death. Okay. Yeah. Even health issues. Like, what is it like when I once was able to do these certain things? Or even as we're getting older in our life and our body is just not responding the way it was before. A loss of flexibility, a loss of mobility. Some cases, it's a loss of a body part. So, whatever it is, loss of ability to eat whatever we want, whatever it is, there is some form of loss. And the word is disenfranchised grief.
Gosh, you just touched on such a trigger for people in my chronic health world. Loss of not being able to eat the way you used to be able to eat. we have to go through this process of identifying our nutritional triggers for our symptoms. Usually we're cutting out sugar, gluten, sometimes dairy, and a whole handful of other things. And it is seen as a huge loss. And some people can never get past it and commit to it for their own health because it's such a norm in society. And so, yeah, that's a huge loss.
It is. And even when you get to, and I'm expanding it just a bit and then I'll come back to it, but even if you have somebody who goes to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, due to either weight or smoking or not exercising enough, some of those typical things, you're going to end up with this, whatever it is, heart disease, again, cancer, whatever it is, right? Diabetes, you can add into it. So a doctor is telling them, and I just read a book recently about a gentleman who had a heart attack and was informed by the doctor, hey, we saved your life. We did, you went in a heart attack, you went into cardiac arrest, we rushed you into surgery, we saved your life. However, and there are certain percentages associated with how many people actually make life changes after that. And when I say life sustaining changes after that, there's some who will start off and I'm going to eat healthier and I'm going to exercise. And then a week or two or so later, it changes. And then they may end up being back in the same cycle again, having another heart attack or something. And then it also did some research around what is it that is sustaining for those individuals who truly take this as an opportunity to be a wake-up call and make change in their life. So there is that. You're right. There's that loss of what once was. And when we're stepping back into that eating what our body is not being able to digest or process, because we want that. I know for myself, it's like I'm a sugar. I were within my family, my dad and I were sugar people. So, the whole sweets and things, and knowing afterwards what the effect was going to have on our body. Like last night, I have both a client and a dear friend of mine who she actually is the poster child for healthy grief. She's actually one of the 30 grief survivors that are in here. And she came to me because she was diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer at the time. And so in addition to doing the work with me to be able to now to reduce, she doesn't have any other symptoms other than it's showing a very reduced the C thing that's inside of her. She has also chosen to take also other methods. So from being eating a very plant-based diet food. So last night there were 3 of us who went out to dinner. So I'm having a very rich lobster soup and our other friend is having bread with the butter and things like that. And to watch her now just be very like this, it's not that I can't, for her, it's not that I can't have this. This is my choice of lifestyle. And this is the positive impact that it's having in my life. And she's still sitting around us at eating sugar and bread and all this gluten loaded things that she's choosing not to. And it's not a matter of just willpower. This is who she is. This is a lifestyle that she's choosing to live right now. And I also know the path that she took to be able to get to that point without thinking like I'm giving up on things. It's no, she's giving herself the sustaining nutrients that she needs. It's a whole different types of shift that happens
It's,
with.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very powerful mindset. And I'm glad that you brought that up because so often we're so focused on what's being taken away from us, what we can't have, what we can't do. It's like, oh, I can't do this anymore. Oh, I can't eat that anymore. And I'm sitting at a table watching everybody eat all these foods that I love, and I'm left out. I'm the odd one out. I can't enjoy this with them. Instead, it's a completely different shift, and it takes steps to get there. But being able to say, no, this isn't willpower, which is something I've always said too. It's not willpower. It's learning how to choose yourself and choose your future over instant gratification. And seeing that the power is actually in the saying no. And to me, it's it's a simplification process more than it is a restrictive process.
Yeah. And if we think it is a restrictive process, then that's another definition of being stuck in that past chapter. So when I think about working with my clients, I think about what is the moving towards versus moving away from behavior. The moving away from behavior is I don't want that my body to flare up due to an allergy after eating this. I don't like anything that is I'm doing this because I don't want that. Like I don't want that. Versus a moving towards behavior, which is I'm doing this because I love the way my body feels afterwards. I'm doing this because it's so healthy for me. I'm doing this because of I'm more flexible. And obviously it depends upon the situation, but it's that from a mindset perspective, it's shifting that I'm doing this because I'm moving away versus a shifting to I'm doing it because it's the pleasure side of it. Like and Stephanie by name, because she is one of the main stories that's in Healthy Grief as for her, it wasn't even a question. It was like sitting down and deciding, oh, well, I'm going to have water because I drink water, I'm not going to have an alcoholic drink because I can't drink. So it's a different way of thinking about it. I like lemon in my water and that's what I drink. That's just who I am. That's what I do. And I think who I am and what I do is also very empowering because then it gets into your state of being versus I have to be this or do this way to get what I want. It's a different level of energy. And again, I still use that proverbial book is if we feel like we have to do this or moving away from that, we're still stuck in that last chapter. And if we're still stuck in that last chapter, we're still dealing with some unprocessed grief.
Mhm. So how do we identify those last state? Well, maybe we should start at the first stages, but I'm curious about those last stages of processing grief where you say you're just stuck on that last chapter. Maybe you
Mhm.
don't even realize that it's still the grief hanging on. Should we address that first and then get into the bigger stuff?
Yes. And let me hold on to the question like, how do you know? And let me first start with this process. I say whenever we are experiencing any type of loss, so recognize I'm moving from grief to loss because any significant loss that's there, and again, it could be a loss of a pet, a loss of not being able, just found out you had another allergy and now you can't eat this, whatever it is, it's a loss of some sort. What happens with that loss is the way we think, feel, act, and react out of that significant loss. Now, this is not just I lost my keys and I can find them, but it's a significant loss where we're having a deep emotion and we're acting out of it. That loss that we have is a window to what is underneath all of our past traumas, triggers, limiting beliefs, any significant negative emotion that's there, the beliefs about ourselves, about the world, with all the stuff that's underneath. And that loss is just a window to see what is underneath that. And that's starting to bubble up to the surface. Whenever we're experiencing a significant loss, whenever we're experiencing like we're just shook, COVID was a perfect example, right? People and having some significant responses to not being able to see people the way in which they saw them before, having to wear masks, not being able to travel, being asked to take vaccines, to all of it, having to keep the social distance. So when we're having a response to that, and again, people around the world having certain responses to it, the way in which I act and reacted to that may be much different, Holly, than yours or anybody who's listening to this. And it has much to do with what our thoughts, feelings, actions, reactions, whatever they are, whatever is underneath that. So think of it like two siblings, who've experienced the same loss of losing a parent. So two siblings, one experience that both of them have, but the way in which they act and react out of that, again, has much more to do with what's underneath that. Their past traumas, triggers, limiting beliefs that are underneath that. So all that to say, when we find that we have a significant response to something that's happening in our life, and it's an opportunity to pause and say, okay, I always say, okay, good. Like, good, this is happening. Good, this is showing up. How is this happening for me? Not why is this happening to me, but how is this happening for me? For what purpose is this happening? I can be more aware of something that I may not necessarily been aware of before. And I'll give an example here. It's been a week and a half now. I have 5 kids, and my youngest, who's 21, has now gone off. We're in California. He's gone off to Virginia now for school. And he also chose to drive to Virginia. So not only am I an empty nester with my last one gone, but also this sense of, oh my God, what's going to happen? Right. So on that day he left, and I knew it was kind of bubbling up. Like, I know my son was going to leave. Originally, he was going to leave on a Thursday. Then he decided to drive, and then it sped up. And all of a sudden, I had 2 days. And he's like, okay, mom, I'm leaving in 2 days versus a week. Right. So this whole empty nester part of me, that's a grief. But what it opened up is as I was exploring all the emotions, and again, being in the field of leadership development and being a coach for over 30 years, I have the skills to be able to walk myself out of the emotions. I do. And I also knew that these were coming up for a purpose for me. So as they were bubbling up here, I sat back and I said, okay, so what is coming up for me? Like, what are the thoughts? What are the feelings? For what purpose am I emoting about this so much? And what came up was a belief that I'm alone. I'm alone. And by the way, when I think about beliefs and things, in this case, a limiting belief that is showing up in different parts of my life. Now, I can look back and I can say, even within the last 6 years, I'm alone has shown up. I have the love of my life walked out of my life for Valentine's Day 6 years ago. I'm alone, right? My brother moves away who lived next to me. I'm alone. Mom and my other brother passed away 2 years ago, 2 weeks apart. I'm alone. Like there's certain things that have shown up where I've looked at my last 6 years specifically, and I said, "Wow, Karen, you created disbelief about yourself. Are you truly alone?" No, I have family around me. I have friends around me. I have those who can support me. But once I identified that belief, I'm alone, I can then look at it as an opportunity to explore how to release it. So that belief does not show up in other areas of my life. So whenever we have a significant loss and we're emoting out of that and having a reaction to it, part of that is to pause and say, what's underneath that for me? Is there a belief that's underneath that? And does that belief really apply? Is there a negative emotion associated with that that I have not released and dealt with? And again, those questions that I'm asking are also things that I help my clients with, because I'm not just dealing with, well, you're an empty nester now, you're grieving. Okay, that's great. You'll get over that. No, I'm like, okay, good. Like, for what purpose? What's underneath that? Let's dive underneath that because it is a window into something else that may what you haven't explored. So when next time you face another loss, even if it's a different kind of loss, that person, me, the client, whoever it is being able to process through it more healthfully than being sucked down again in some of those unprocessed and unresolved issues that are underneath. This leads into your question, Holly, is how do you know? Like I have clients who say, well, how do I know if I have healthfully processed through grief? And there's two parts to that. One is grief, where we're continuing to emote about it, will settle in our body. So let me repeat that. Unprocessed grief will settle in our body in various different ways, from minor aches and pains to major ailments, some of which can be life-threatening. So recognize how it's not just a nice thing to do to deal with grief, it can be life-saving. Okay. So understand from a health perspective, that's part of the definition of healthy grief is grieving in a way that it doesn't settle in the neurology of our body. The other part of healthy grief is then how do I know when I had hopefully processed through, not so much settling in our body. And here's an example. And I always, whether it gets back to the example we used of going out and eating, it depends upon the type of grief. Let's set it that way.
Really quick, Holly B here. I just wanted to interrupt the podcast to ask you for a quick favor. Can you take just a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening in on? It makes a world of a difference. And the reach of this podcast, it takes like literally under 10 seconds. So go do that right now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now back to the episode.
But if we have health issues which limit the food, like I would say my client Stephanie last night was healthily there. She wasn't like drooling over the bread or wanting to take that one little bite of my soup. None of that. We even were celebrating tomorrow's her birthday. Or like, hey, Stephanie, maybe we can see if they have one a little like, ice cream or something where we can share. And she's like, nope, I don't eat that. It wasn't, I can't. I don't. And she just said it matter of factly. And I'm like, okay, so we going to share it and share it. It's one of those where it just became lighthearted and fun. Another example is Facebook, social media. For example, we've lost a loved one. Like we're coming up to Mother's Day at the time of this recording. And if you've lost your mother, or as a mother, you maybe weren't able to have a child, or same thing for Father's Day, or people are celebrating anniversaries or getting married or engaged, and you just went through a divorce or a breakup. So anything that maybe people are celebrating, some kind of celebration that also reminds you or triggers you about your loss, and you find that you can't send them a heartfelt, authentic congratulations, you're emoting about it, and it's taking you down for hours and days and weeks and months, then you have not healthfully moved on. You are stuck in the past. Here's an example of healthfully. I already used the example of my Stephanie. No, this is just who I am from eating the food from a social media perspective, that you can authentically say, oh, they're celebrating their 35th anniversary and they were high school friends of mine. And I don't think that I'm ever going to be celebrating 35. Okay, I'm noting it, but I'm still going to send my heartfelt congratulations and wishing them an anniversary and congratulating the new baby if I've had a loss, and celebrating Mother's Day in a way that I can authentically honor other people and congratulate them on their past, even if it may be even a slight reminder about a loss I had, or can do that without any thought about a loss that you had. That means that you're healthfully being able to process through again, versus being stuck in the past where emotionally it's taking you down for hours, days, or even longer than that.
So, at what point does somebody say, I think I need help in processing this? What are the signs there? How long should they wait? And that I'm
Hard to
sure varies. I'm sure that varies.
It does vary. And heartfelt response to that is, when you've had a significant loss, seek support right away. Say that, bottom line, seek support right away. And also recognizing that depending upon the loss, you may feel one of these three words, which I find with a majority of people who've gone through various different types of losses. Well, we're lost. And ironically, as I just mentioned this, alone. Okay. So overwhelmed, lost, and alone are three key words that I have heard over and over. People who are in my grief survival case studies and healthy grief, even the recent marketing research that I've done, those are what shows up. And when somebody, let's just say, is overwhelmed, which is you've just received this diagnosis, you just found out that this person has passed, you just then received the divorce papers. I'm giving some key examples here. Is the first response is typically like a shock, a numb, or an overwhelmed at that point in time. So I'm going to address that question, Holly, from two parts. First of all, when we realize that this is the situation, so we're in that grief situation, an opportunity, maybe take time for ourselves to just ground ourselves, give ourselves grace. And whatever grace might be, like being able to take a day, a week, a month off just to say, okay, right now I'm not going to be at my highest productivity. Do I need to engage with work? Can I bring in support for if you're, with your family in regards to being able to have other people provide meals? That's a big thing around. Even the basics can go by the wayside, from grocery shopping to making meals to taking the kids places. Like, recognize, like, I right now am not high functioning. And rather than me feeling like I have to get back out and be functioning, just give yourself grace and call in whatever support you need just for the basic functions that's going on. Flip side, for somebody who wants to support somebody through grief. And again, healthy grief is not only for the griever, it's for the survivor as the one who's supporting them as well. Is how then can you support somebody who's going through grief? One of the first thing, again, think overwhelm in mind. This is a 2-pound, 408-page book. It is a great resource, not just for that individual loss, but also in many different ways. However, I found people who said, oh, I got the great resource for you. You've just lost a loved one. Here, read Dr. Karen's book. And I'm like, thank you. And thank you. And if somebody's overwhelmed, the last thing they want to do is, just be given this book. So the first thing I recommend to somebody who wants to support somebody going through grief is, one, just acknowledge where they are. Just even if it is like, hey, I'm so sorry that you're going through this loss. Just acknowledging that for them. The idea about being seen, heard, and understood. I'm going to pause when I say understood, but just being seen and heard the grief that they're going through is so important. And I paused when I said understood. I'm going to put that in quotes, because one thing that can be very triggering for those who are going through some sort of loss is to say, I understand, or I understand you. That can be triggering because all of our losses are so different. Maybe since we're talking more about health related ones, let's say, for example, if it's a food sensitivity, oh, I understand because I have gluten allergies. Well, no, you don't understand because I have certain other kinds of responses to food. Like that in and of itself, I understand could be triggering. So I feel you. Tell me more about what's going on in your life, or I could understand in my own way because I have some similar experiences. Tell me more about yours. Really engage to be able to see, hear, and understand them and where they're coming from. The second is, rather than saying, what do you need or how can I help you? Again, for somebody who's going through grief, they're overwhelmed. They may not even know how to respond to that question. Or if they're going through grief, and this happened to me after I lost my dad specifically, is people are like, hey, can I help you? What do you need? And I started to think about some things I needed, but I felt like I was a burden to even ask people for what I needed. So the second thing is, think about what you can offer somebody, and honestly, that you can follow through on it. No, like, Holly, can I get some groceries for you and bring some of those over? And then you say yes. And then I tell you, oh, sorry, I can't do it. I mean, it defeats the purpose. But think about what you can offer them, and also think about the basics. So if you know they have kids and if you can help out, hey, can I help out taking little Billy to school and back? Can I Uber some food to you? Could it help if I brought over some food? Sometimes it's not even just saying, can I? It's saying, hey, I'm going to come over with some Starbucks to sit down and talk with you. Like, even giving them the opportunity just to say no. And again, this depends upon how much you know them, but providing things that even the basics like food and transportation, just like it's something that you give them the opportunity to say no to you, providing something specific. And the third thing I would say too is, even with Healthy Grief, which is a great resource, is I say for people that know it, is get familiar with the book. Great resources, great framework, Majority of the book, honestly, about 2/3 of the book are the 30 grief survivor case studies. There's 7 different categories of grief in here, from death and dying to intimate relationships like divorce, other relationships like family estrangements and friendships, maternity losses, career shifts, identity crisis, and then trilogy, like 3 different types of griefs that happen all at the same time. And I encourage people, like, get familiar with the book, find a story that may relate to that person and give it to them and say, "Hey," when they're ready, "Hey, here's a book you just had a grief." I have a resource that I think is gonna be very helpful for you. When you're ready, let me know. And when they're ready, start by putting a bookmark in that one story and say, "Hey, it's a great resource." Start right with the bookmark in there. Just read that one story. Again, some of the stories are 4, 5, 6 pages long. But then have a review with the framework. Would then get them, if they're interested, then get them involved in the framework that can help them process grief. That's the best way to be able to introduce healthy grief. So those are the 3 things Holly could think of in regards to just acknowledging where they are. Second is providing them something that you think that's really going to be helpful for them. And third is, if they're overwhelmed, is the healthy grief, but by starting with a story that's going to relate to them.
That's so helpful because it's so hard when you personally haven't been through something that you're watching somebody else go through to know how the what is the appropriate action, what is the appropriate thing to say in order to comfort them, and you just want to do something nice. You just want to be supportive. But when I know that you talk about this, we want to say something positive. Oh, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through this. We say all these things to try to help them feel positive, but oftentimes that can come across as triggering or as you talk about toxic positivity. I'd love for you to dive into that topic. It comes up a lot with chronic health as well, because so many people in the chronic health space are going through what they're going through, and their friends and family don't know how to address it. So they, oh, think positive. Oh, everything's going to work out for a reason. And I've said it myself because I didn't know what else to say to people. And I'm all about mindset. I'm all about positivity. I'm all about looking for the lessons, but not everybody's receptive to those messages, especially when something's really raw at the beginning. Into that toxic
Yes.
positivity.
Absolutely. And also, I've had people who have bought the book specifically for the subtitle. So, normalizing and navigating loss. Again, grief is not something that we should avoid. Let's then dive into that in a culture of toxic positivity. So, I'm glad you brought that up. So, let's start with this, which you've mentioned, Holly, like positivity. Isn't it helpful? Isn't it, if somebody needs to be cheered up, or there's all the research that's out there around how watching funny cat videos or going to comedy shows or watching a movie can also elicit the hormones within our body to help us feel better and also to feel healthier and process through grief. Yes, and it's just something that you just mentioned, Holly. If that person is not at that point yet, it could hinder their grief process. So it's all about is what is happening, because toxic positivity can happen both from the griever side as well as the supporter side. Okay, so I'll talk about that. But if it's something that hinders the natural or healthy grief process, then that by definition is toxic. So is it healthily helping, or is it toxic? It's hindering that healthy process of grief. That then is toxic. So let's give examples here. So let's start from the griever side. When you think, well, hey, can it be actually toxic from the griever side? Yes, it can be. And what it looks like is, so for example, I just went through a loss. Let's just say I lost a pet and I'm grieving. But for some reason, I feel like I can't grieve little Sparky passing away, right? Because it's not right. I should, and get all these words I'm saying, maybe like I shoulda, I oughta. all these things that I may be placing upon myself to walk around and put on that fake smile. When I do that, it hinders me actually going through the emotions and saying, yeah, I'm grieving little Sparky. Like little Sparky was my pet, my love, my child, like whatever it is. Like I actually have lost something and I'm going through that grief, but I'm stuffing it down as if I'm not, I don't have the right to grieve over it. And I'm putting on that fake smile, which it then isolates me from getting the support that I may need from other people to be seen, heard, and understood for what I'm feeling about this loss. Which now you see, for example, on social media, more people coming up and really honoring, hey, I just lost my cat, my dog, my bird, my reptile, my turtle, whatever it is. And I'm grieving. I actually honor and actually encourage people when they do that because that's another part of sharing. It's that disenfranchised grief that we talked about before, that they feel comfortable enough to share. I just had a loss right now, and honoring that for them. So, toxic positivity from a grief perspective is when do we feel like we have to put on that fake smile or to prevent ourselves or isolate ourselves from others rather than healthfully engaging in that grief process. However, we tend to find more of the toxic positivity, in which you mentioned, Holly, is from those of us when we're supporters and we want to say and do whatever we can to truly support somebody. So when I was interviewing my clients as well as some others for Healthy Grief, the grief survivals, the 30 stories that are in here, there was a gentleman that I talked to. His name was David, who fortunately I got him on the death versary of his son who died by suicide 11 years prior to the time that I talked to him. So he was in a real raw spot at that point in time. And when I talked to him, so he's not in the book. Now, I honestly wanted to make sure I found people who were healthfully enough, who had more healthfully moved into that next chapter of their life, and then they were not traumatized by sharing their story. And David said to me, he said, when soon after his son had passed, somebody came up to him and was talking to him, and he said, yes, well, your son's in a better place. To which his response was sort of like, you, my son would be better here with me. And in getting to think about that is like what pops out of our mouth, which is with all good intentions, right? We're not trying to dig the knife in somebody's heart that's already bleeding. We're coming from great intentions, but it pops out of our mouth. And so, thinking from the supporter side, if we're saying something, anything, here are some thoughts to think of, which also could lead to toxicity. So, toxic positivity. And what I'm about to say, well, I'm saying it because I'm feeling uncomfortable with somebody else not being in their happy place. Again, am I saying something because I want to make them feel better because I'm feeling uncomfortable? And if you are, that's another window for you. For what purpose are you feeling uncomfortable about somebody else going through grief? Because if you're uncomfortable about this person going through grief, how are you going to be comfortable about your own grief or somebody else? So that's another window for you. It may be somebody else grieving, but if you're feeling uncomfortable about it, what's coming up for you? Just be curious about that. Okay. So if I'm feeling uncomfortable, that's just an awareness for ourselves. Another tendency is if I want to fix somebody, right? We've seen that. What is that? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I think it was the old book that came up in the 90s. So typical male, female, traditional, typical male, female, and the female just wants to be heard and the man just wants to come in and fix. Now, take the genders apart here just a minute. And there are people in our life, if we're going through, sometimes we just want to be heard and felt for what we're going through, not fixed. So if you're a supporter who is you, that thing that's about ready to come out of your mouth is because we want to fix somebody, again, that's the window. For what purpose do we feel like we have to fix something that's going on versus being able to sit back and support somebody just by listening to what's going on, truly listening without listening for what am I going to say next? How can I help them? What can I do for this? So those are some tendencies, two tendencies from a supporter's perspective. If I'm feeling uncomfortable with somebody else being not in a happy state, or if I feel like I have to fix people. Now, we may have some great suggestions on things. Those are just two things to keep in mind, or just being aware if what I'm about to say, is it honestly going to support them? Or is it more about me just needing to feel them feeling comfortable or needing to fix what's going on? So without going into too much detail, because I do have a section in the book on it, those are just some quick things to think about, both on the griever side as well as on the supporter side, associated with anything we say or prevent ourselves from engaging with that may be toxic because we're hindering that healthy grief process.
So many great points there for both sides. I think so often it's the supporter's own discomfort around the situation that bubbles up into that toxic positivity, like you were saying. Sometimes I've found from my own experience as a supporter or potential supporter that I don't know what to do, so I don't do anything. And I don't know that's necessarily the right step either.
One of the stories that's in here was a woman who stillbirth. So a maternity story, stillbirth at 8 months along. And the day after she had the stillbirth, her daughter's, I think it was her daughter's seventh birthday. Like, everybody knew because she didn't have a baby. She was no longer pregnant. It had kind of gone through the rumor mill. That whole birthday party, nobody mentioned it. Nobody mentioned it. And we had a conversation about it because it gets back to something that you mentioned. I said to her, "What would you have liked somebody to say?" And she said, "I would have liked somebody to just acknowledge, 'Hey, I'm sorry for your loss.'" And I said, "Good, because sometimes people don't know what to say, whatever it is." And I'm assuming too, also for those of us who are dealing with various different types of health issues, or we're out at the restaurant and something comes up around not drinking or not eating something, one of the best things to do, and I do this with some of my clients too, grief or not, is three little words that are so powerful. Tell me more. Tell me more. You're not What it does is we're not putting our judgment on it. We're asking that person if they're open to it. It's just sharing more with us. And tell me more can mean so many different things. For example, it could be what somebody can eat, what they do want. Hey, can I just emote about how much I loved grandma? Can I tell you about all the exciting things from grandma because I just lost her? Whatever it is, it allows that person to tell you whatever it is they need just by those three simple words. Tell me more.
That's so powerful. Yeah, there is something we can say when we don't know what to say. And that's perfect. And that could fit into so many different scenarios. Another aspect of grieving that I'm curious about, and this could possibly be both on the supporter and the griever side, is I'm curious about boundary setting around grieving. I don't even know exactly how to like extrapolate on that question, but I'm sure that you can find many answers to that.
Yes, in fact, I do have a small section in the book about boundary setting, and I say small because what I found is there's so much to boundary setting. So I actually have a whole presentation that I do on boundary setting in itself. So let's narrow it down for this purpose, which, by the way, another thing that I do in Healthy Grief is there is a resource section, which is in here. There's a QR code that goes to a section that has the audio downloads to all the 30 grief survivals that are in there. And yes, I'm going to go back to the healthy boundaries. So if I go off track, Holly, bring me back. So it has the 30, so all 30 people who have done the grief survivors that are in here have read their story as if somebody was sitting across from the table at a Starbucks or sitting next to the couch with them, like breaking down, crying, skipping over words, even adding a couple different things that are in there. So you can actually read the book and actually listen to them as well. And it's somebody, if you find we're talking about toxic positivity or what can I say, that's a great example. Like as I'm listening to somebody's story, like Stephanie's story, what would I say or how would I respond to a friend of mine who might find out she was just diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer? Like it just, you're engaging with the readers in so many different ways. So the resource section, there's a QR code. The first thing that's on there are the 30 grief survivals and their various different stories. The other is some various different resources, and I've only put a couple in there so far, and that's one of the thing I love because I don't have to update the book. I just keep on adding things to this resource section. So one of the things that I am going to be doing is doing a recording of one of my short presentations on boundary setting beyond what I put in the book here. So that was all to say that the resource section is very valuable for the book itself.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and interrupt the program for just a hot minute. You know that I'm so passionate about this podcast, but what I'm also really passionate about is helping women with lupus minimize their symptoms, boost their energy so that they can indulge in life again. So if you are a woman who is struggling with lupus, who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, who's struggling to manage your flares, if you're finding that your lupus symptoms are just really getting in the way of you being able to live your life the way you want to, I feel you. I've been there myself and I felt the same way. And what I've found is that there are a certain set of health fundamentals that once applied will support you in your foundational health. They will support you in building and maintaining that energy, minimizing flares, and allowing you to, again, indulge in life and follow your passions. So, if that is something that you are interested in creating for yourself, let's jump on a call together. I will walk you through the process that I use with my clients to get them from sick and tired to strong foundation of health by implementing my Health Bridge protocol. If this is something you're interested in chatting more about, I would love to talk to you. Apply for a free clarity call with me, and I look forward to getting to know you soon. And now back to the episode.
So when thinking about boundaries, so when it comes to grief, two things are coming up for me, and you're right. It depends upon the griever as well as the supporter side. So I've had for the grievers around boundary setting, it could be something like recognizing, hey, when do I need to set my own boundaries around my energies? So in there is also being clear. I know that there's much more than this, but I'm giving you some quick tips around when do you as a griever or even as a human being, and by the way, I'm part of this as I'm about ready to describe this person in the past, is when do you say yes to somebody, to something when you really mean no? When do you say yes when you really mean no? And again, I used to be that people pleaser, and every once in a while I have to recognize myself like, just say yes to that because I was a people pleaser. I wanted to help other people. And when we're grieving, sometimes it may be like, hey, do you want to go out? Yes. You know what? I'm really not feeling it right now. I really, or somebody wants to come over and bring some food and you just want to take a freaking nap. Whatever it is, when do we say yes when we really mean no? So I will say from a griever, that's just a quick tip that's there. From a supporter side, and here there's so many different things that I can say, and here's what I have found. There's a number of people who say, hey, I really want to be available and I want to be there for my friend who's grieving, and I can only take so much. And I still want to be a good family member and a friend, but I can only take so much. How do I set boundaries around how much I am make myself available to a friend? And to that, I say, be very clear about your time and what you can and can't do. So here's an example is, for example, if I have a friend of mine who's going through something, I may say, hey, great, I can set your time boundaries. Like, hey, I have a half an hour or 15 minutes. Like, be very clear about your time when I really want to be here for you. So this is the time that I have. Or, hey, I'm in the neighborhood. I can stop by and I have 20 minutes to stop by. And in other words, be clear about your time that you have available with them and also hold to that time. So various different ways. Like for me, if I'm working with my clients, sometimes I even set the phone on a 9 minutes until where the alarm just silently goes off and I say, great, I have to leave in another 9 minutes. I'll set it again. So how can I be of best support to you in these last 9 or 10 minutes before I get off the phone or I have to leave? So that's a time one. Another one associated with that, and again, being a supporter, is when you realize that somebody is significantly stuck in the grief cycle in a way that you yourself can only help them so much. And I do talk a little bit more about this in the book, the Healthy Grief book specifically. But if they start getting into that prolonged grief where you realize they're starting to use you as a therapist and that's not your role and it's starting to affect you emotionally or affect your work, by the way, set your boundaries around their energy. Talk a bit about that as well. Also, really bringing up that conversation around you truly want to support them. And you're also reaching your boundary of feeling like you can actually support that and recommending other resources available to them. And again, at the back of Healthy Grief, I recommend various different resources. One of the typical ones is a therapist, and there's all different kinds of therapists that are out there. I'm not a traditional therapist. Okay, there's other coaches like you, the coaches that are out there, maybe for health related ones that they're reaching out to people like you, Holly, those coaches that are there who have the knowledge and the expertise that we may not have as that well-intended friend or family member, or maybe we're too close to them and being able to provide them and just saying, I want to be here to support you. I love you, saying whatever it is that you can say and how much you know them. I love you. I care for you. I want the most for you. And I'm feeling I'm getting to the point where I can't provide any more for you than a professional or this might provide for you. So as a supporter, also recognizing that. I've had somebody recently who's tried to support somebody who is just, it's reached the boundary and it's actually turned on her, unfortunately, negatively. So it was because she didn't set her boundaries in the beginning. So I hope that that gives some quick tips, both for the griever and the supporter around setting healthy boundaries. So I'm glad you brought that up, Holly.
I think that's really helpful. And I've certainly been in situations as a supporter where I would say I'm not great at setting boundaries. And when you love somebody and you want nothing but the best for them, it can start to impact your own mental health, your own lifestyle, your own physical health if you don't set those boundaries. So I think that's super important. And of course, on the Griever side too. So thank you for outlining that. You know, when somebody is grieving, it can really feel like they're that you don't have control over that experience, right? This is something not always if it's health perhaps, but with losing somebody, these are seen as external things that are happening outside of you, that are happening to you, that you're, at the mercy of this experience. And what are and I know this is hard at the beginning of a grieving process, but what are some things that you can maybe recommend to how do we start to control a little bit of our grieving process and just recognize that there's more to it? And I know you touched on some of this already in the conversation, but I just think it's an important point to circle back to.
My biggest recommendation to help take control over your grief is a framework. And that actually is the main part that I have in the Healthy Grief book, which is the Healthy Grief framework. And I use it as an analogy associated with a mall map. So let's imagine, for example, Holly, that we're going on a road trip somewhere and we're going through a state that we've never been through before and we're going to go hiking. And all of a sudden I realize I don't have my boots, my hiking boots. but I'm making great time on this road trip. So I'm only going to stop when I really need to stop. So all of a sudden I realize, okay, here I'm stopping through this strange town. There's a mall over there. I need to go to the restroom and I'm hungry as well. And in a mall, they should find hiking boots, right? Okay. So I'm going along. I go in the mall. So I've never been here before. So one of the first things I need to do is search out a mall map, like the kiosk, right? So when we're going through grief, imagine like that's the mall. We've just arrived in here. We've never been in this type of grief situation before. Like the mall is, I know I need things as a griever, but I don't necessarily know where they are. And I may know that I need certain things. Okay. Map over the analogy. I go into the mall, never been here before. And I know that I'm hungry. I need to go to the bathroom and I need to get hiking boots. So find the mall map. So finding the mall map analogy is you found the kiosk, but then you need to figure out, okay, of all what type of stores do I need? And in other words, is famous footwear that sells regular shoes going to get me those hiking shoes? Or do I need something like an REI that's more for backpacking, right? Okay, REI. Well, there's all kinds of food. Do I want the hot dog on the stick or the In-N-Out burger? And again, you place in whatever food that you want, then find those. What do they have? And bathrooms, multiple different bathrooms. So I've located that on the kiosk, but it's not going to help me any until I finally go through and figure out where am I on this map? Where am I on this map? And you finally find, which is usually like a red star or dot, like you are here. Okay, great. Now from there, I can plot my routes. I need to go to the bathroom. I'm not going to go at the one that's always at the other end of the mall. I'm going to find the bathroom closest to where I am. Okay, done that. Now, where's the food located and where's the REI located? So I can then plot my route, get out of the mall, back in my car, and back on the road again, back into that next chapter in my life. So all that to say is that framework is important. Again, 3 words that I mentioned earlier. When somebody's going through grief, overwhelmed, lost, and alone, how can they process through that? So I have a 5-stage framework that I use that really focuses on what are we thinking? What are we feeling? What action steps do we need to take, even if it's this hour or today? What support do I need? And what does the future look like? And that is the basis of that 5-stage framework. And those framework, I ask various different questions, is intended to get into picture as to where am I right now? For example, that last one, which is what does the future look like for you? What's that future vision? It may be different today because I'm stuck in my own grief. It's like somebody described it as like driving through the fog and you can barely see like the road just in front of you. You can't let alone know what's on the other side. It's like you could only just see what's in front of you. So the focus, that future focus might be, what do I want the end of today to look like? What do I want the end of the week to look like? Let alone I can't think of what the next month, 6 months, a year is going to look like from now. So each day it takes you closer and closer to moving closer to that next chapter of your life. So again, that 5-stage healthy grief framework gets you to move incrementally at your own pace with your own unique path through your own proverbial mall of grief to find your way out.
This should just be in like the book of life. Like, here's your guidebook, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
something that we all go through on multiple different levels and throughout our life. I'm sure as a childhood, as a child, and we grieve the loss of our best stuffed animal that we left at the park, right? That's
Mhm.
just as significant as when we lose our pet 20 years later. Uh, This is these are tools. The ones we have in our toolbox, we have them for life.
And
Yeah.
that's another reason why I say for healthy grief, but it's more than death and dying. It's an everyday loss. And this book is more than just the event. It really is truly a lifelong companion. So it's not just I buy it just because I had this loss in my life. It's about life losses. How can
Mm.
I then healthfully process through life losses? Because once you have processed through one grief and truly are looking through that window of what's underneath it, you're then able to healthily process through the other griefs. Like it's the last 5 years that I really have been working on the theories that are in this book. And like I hinted upon earlier, I lost my mom and my brother 2 weeks apart 2 years ago. I handled their passings much differently than I did my dad's 12 years ago, which is one of the stories that inspired me to do something different about this. A week after my mom passed, again, lost my brother. 2 weeks later, lost my mother, which, by the way, a month later, my other brother was diagnosed with dementia. So I felt like I lost three major family members all within a 6 week period of time. But a week after my mom passed away, I stepped back into a program where I was the head coach of an organization that helps train other people in neurolinguistics programming. I was the head coach. I'm the one who people come to when they need to emotionally go through something that in the classroom they couldn't process or the team leads were not processing. I needed to make sure a week after my mom passed away, 3 weeks after my dad passed away, or my brother passed away, that I was in an emotional place that I was not going to be triggered by what was coming up. And I was going to be able to honestly hold an emotional space for them, whatever they were going through as they were processing through this program. And I did it. And I did it because I had the skills and ability to be able to healthfully process through enough to where I can step into that program 7 days later. It didn't mean that I had completely processed through my grief. Oh, no. And I actually did my Facebook Lives associated with all of that too, just so people understood I'm a human being too. I am vulnerable. I have my ups and downs. And here are the tips and tools and processes that I was using through that. And so what I did was I took those techniques and I put them into a book. That's all I did to help people process through.
Well, I hope that everybody immediately goes and gets your book, even if they don't feel like they need it right now. Like this is something we want to have on hand
Yes.
for the future because for us or for somebody in our lives, somebody is going to need access to that information. Unfortunately, probably sooner rather than later. So why not have this at our arsenal at the ready for when we need to draw on it?
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you.
Dr. Karen, how can people find you? Where can they access your book?
The easiest way to find me is at drkaren.com, just as you see profiled here without the dot, DRKARENKRAMER.com. And when you go to that website, there is a couple things that are on there. First of all, you'll see just down below the ribbon is one ribbon that mentions healthy grief. If you click on that, it takes you to the link trailer, more information, and even go directly there to purchasing the book. And yes, the book is also available on Amazon. So just by going to my website, it just provides you more information. You also have the video of the interview done with Jack Canfield, since he does do the forward that's for the book that's in there, as well as various different people who are endorsing the book. That's all the link is. If you're interested in finding out more about how I can support you and what I do, whether it's my upcoming masterclass, whether it is doing one-on-one work, there's the book a call button, which is in the upper right-hand corner as well. So at drkarenkramer.com, you can find information both for contacting me as well as finding out more information about healthy grief.
Awesome. And I will put all of that in the show notes as well. This has been an amazing, powerful conversation. Dr. Karen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Holly. It's been a pleasure.
I knew that this would be a fantastic conversation, and Dr. Karen did not disappoint. I know that you have so many more tools in your tool belt now, or different ways of looking at the experience of grief and maybe acknowledging that some things that you've been going through actually were part of a grieving process when society might say otherwise. And I hope that it gave you some empowerment around feeling comfortable in going through a grieving process and giving yourself the time and space that is required for you to move through this, but also giving you tools to move through it in a healthy way and not let it run your life. It's a time period, it's a thing that we go through. There's no end point, but we can learn to process things and still be able to live despite the grief, right? Couple things to circle back to is just the empowerment aspect that Dr. Karen mentioned when she was talking about her friend who now makes different decisions and different choices about the food that she consumes because of her cancer diagnosis, right? She said, this is creating the understanding within yourself of this is who I am and this is what I do. When we are managing a chronic health experience such as lupus, we do need to shift things. But again, the mindset and how you do it is so vital in your experience of life, right? So, in your self care practices that you do on a daily basis, we need to look at these things and learn to see them as this is who I am now. And the person who I am now makes these choices to care for myself, as opposed to, I can't do these things anymore. I can't eat that food. I can't stay up late. I can't go out on a long hike with my friends anymore. It's all looking through things as from a viewpoint of loss and lack versus I am consciously making these choices to better my health, to better my life experience. And I can fill in the gaps that felt like a loss. I can fill those gaps in with something else. So I hope that really helps in understanding the difference between a lack mindset around your illness and a positive mindset around your illness. So I hope that you take these conversations as an invitation to dive a little bit deeper. And that can be hard to do on your own. So I invite you to book a free call with me. I would love to dive into some of this with you and help you strategize your next best steps when it comes to your health journey. Dr. Karen Kramer as well is available to chat with you and dive into these topics if you are struggling with grief or you are looking at different areas of your life that you would like some help and some guidance in. She is also a fantastic resource for you. So please reach out to us. Make this your year. Don't let things slide under the rug for another year. What reason do you have to wait? Honor yourself. Thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you next week on the next episode of the Health Bridge podcast.